Feixiong, written on an autumn night in Chang'an after being sick. Mid-autumn in the imperial city. 10 days of rain have passed. Even after clearing, the cicada's song is still not heard. All alone in my quiet courtyard, just up from a recent sickness. Geese form a flock and head south to my hometown. So here we have a poem from Feixiong. So let's start by introducing who he is. So Feixiong lived in basically the first half of the 9th century, so he would be a mid-Tang poet. He was a native of Suzhou, which is basically in the eastern coast of China, I think relatively close to modern Nanjing. And he was the son of a famous literatus, Gu Guang, who flourished in the late 8th century. Now, Gu Guang, his father made his presence felt in the 300 Tang Poems anthology. He only has one poem there, and if memory serves, it's a poem about a concubine in the imperial palace, something of the sort. Probably not the best representative poem of his. Gu Guang was mainly famous for his Taoistic poetry. He retired very early on and went to live in Maoshan, which was a little bit of a, let's say, a Taoist Vatican in Tang China. It was a mountain where the main monasteries and representatives of the, I think it was the Shangqing Taoist tradition, had their main spaces. His son, Gu Feixiong, led a probably similar career to his father. He was, for the most part, an unsuccessful Jinshi candidate. He tried to pass the examinations without success until 845, when he failed again, but the emperor, Wuzong, revised his papers, and he compelled the examiners to pass him. In spite of that, he didn't have a long career in office. He just served in some minor positions in counties, and then, probably because he shared his father's wit and insolence and not effective capacity for being a good civil servant, he retired to Maoshan, which was 30 miles southeast of Nanjing, where, like his father, he spent the rest of his life in the mountain. His poetry, only 70 poems of Gu Feixiong have survived, and they are mostly about persons and events in his own life. The one we have just read is a heptasyllabic quatrain that, in Chinese, my Chinese is terrible, but it would be秋夜长安病后作. So this poem of his, written on an autumn night in Chang'an after being sick, probably was written while he was unsuccessfully trying to pass the examinations. And it's relatively representative, perhaps, of his poetry, as opposed to his father. His poetry is not very Taoistic. It's quite this worldly. And, this poem is, the typical piece that you would imagine a scholar official composing while at the capital and lamenting the bad weather, the physical illness that he has suffered, and the general frustration at being in the capital and far from home. I mean, that would be the main topic of this short poem. Loneliness. The poetic persona of the poet is in the capital. It's been raining. Autumn is the sad season, as you well know. It's even worse when it rains a lot, because then visits are not really possible. So the poetic persona was feeling lonely in his abode. And to make matters worse, he's feeling sick. And, he has this last vision in the last line of the quatrain of geese going home, which is a typical autumn sight. Well, geese going south. And, of course, he was from Suzhou, so from the perspective of Chang'an, that's the southeast direction. So, in some aspects, it's a very, very, very conventional poem. This could be a set piece written by almost any Chinese poet of this period, but knowing Gu Feixiong's biography gives it a slight ring of authenticity, because, we can believe that this is, not just an academic exercise in making a genre piece. It's a poem composed on starting from real and felt emotions and experiences. Okay, the poem is very brief. It's a quatrain, so let's comment it. First couplet: Mid-autumn in the imperial city, 10 days of rain have passed. Even after clearing, the cicada's song is still not heard. So the first couplet, as is usually the case in these circumstances, locates us. It gives us the time, it gives us the place. It's mid-autumn, so probably that would be the 8th month of the lunar calendar. And we are in the imperial city, that's Chang'an. Well, it could be Luoyang because it was an imperial city as well, but the title clearly tells us that we are in Chang'an. And the date is given more specifically. 10 days of rain have passed. Well, not the date. So the last days have been days of heavy raining. Again, this heavy raining not only connotes the autumn, and it acts as, one of the signifiers of autumn. In autumn it rains a lot. Also in the summer, I think, in southern China. I'm not sure in northern China. But anyway, it's a seasonal indicator. But it's also hinting at the underlying topic, the loneliness of the poet, because if there are heavy rains, probably visitors aren't going to come visiting. Even after clearing, the cicada's song is still not heard. So again, the cicada singing in autumn is a typical autumn image. But here, it's probably being used as, now it has cleared, the rain has gone, and nobody has come. Yeah? Just as he can't hear the cicada's song, he hasn't been able to hear the voices of friends and acquaintances. But again, until here, this is just implied, very, very subtle, very subdued. Second couplet: all alone in my quiet courtyard, just up from a recent sickness, geese form a flock and head south to my hometown. So if it wasn't clear, the third line clearly indicates that the poet is alone, and loneliness is generally a very, very sad thing for a scholar official. That is, they never enjoy or seem to enjoy or praise loneliness much. So he's alone, he's in the courtyard, so he's come out, and we knew from the title, but it's hammered in again here, that, he has been sick for some days perhaps, so he is probably still struggling, going out, looking at what he can see, at the clear sky maybe, the stars, the moon. But what catches his attention is not stars or moon, it's geese, which again, a stereotypical autumn sight, but it's significant. Remember, in Chinese poetry, when nature is depicted, generally nature is acting also as a mirror image, a correlate, an objective correlate of the emotions and feelings of the poet. So the selection, first of the season, but then of the elements in the season, is clearly meant to transmit the tone and the hidden feelings of the poet. And here, the image of geese forming a flock, so they're together, they're not alone, and heading south to his hometown, are an image of the poet's isolation and of his desire to fly south as well, to return home. And so that's it, really. It's not a very complicated poem. It has this, in my opinion, this subtext, which is very interesting, and a pretty standard piece of scholar official poetry.